No.
You're perfect.
And this way, they took a show about canon fodder characters in a successful video game based on how you used to smash unrelated action figures together when you were a child, and turned it into the most complex, thought-provoking TV show of the last decade. At the beginning of a work of fiction, you always make a promise. The promise is always the same. This story might have a lot of twists and turns, plot twists, but at its core, the story will be essentially what you are writing, what you are promising in the beginning. But in Arcane, if you don't know anything about League of Legends, which was my case at the time, what do you get out of that prologue? Two kids in some sort of conflict. A strong guy takes the kids in after they found out their parents died in whatever happened here. The older pink-haired girl is the one who really grasps what happened, and she's furious. If you had to make bets, you'd say Vi is set to be the protagonist, the hero of the story, that will end whatever conflict this is. Her fatal flaw would be revenge for the death of her parents, her saving grace, the love of a surrogate father, and protecting her little sister. That would complete a character arc, so she ends the conflict, but not out of revenge, but to make things right for the people she loves. After the first 3 episodes, you can say for certain that's not what the story is about. After the whole season, you understand this story is about how the two sisters lose each other. And if you learn about the game, you realize it's about how they became sworn enemies, which doesn't exactly happen at the end of the first season, but it's coming. As it happens, the conflict, i.e. justice for the Undercity, is basically the motivator for this tragedy, and because the sisters start as kids and beyond never cease to be that conflict has more to do with Silco, the villain, and Vander, the surrogate father, and also Jace, a character that we don't even see in episode 1. Yeah, in time Vi and Jace will team up, but going back to that first episode, was this what you expected? Because I didn't. Did Arcane lie to us? In writing, they tell you shouldn't betray the promise you make at the start of the story, and they tell you that so much that you can give up creativity. Actually, a promise can be as narrow or as broad as you want, and you can deliver on said promise in a myriad of ways. In the prologue of Arcane, there is a conflict, a war, a rebellion, that kills Vi and Powder's parents. There is no hint of the future conflict between the sisters. But because of the tone, you can tell, okay, this terrible thing happened, and some more terrible things are going to happen to these girls, because this terrible conflict was not solved. In that broad sense, the promise is spot on. The prologue doesn't provide specifics, but no one will feel betrayed at the end of the season. What's the ultimate reason why Jinx and Vi will fight each other? This defeat. The inequality between the Undercity against the Upper City. The story delivers, just not in the most obvious way. For example, Powder's dark side, Jinx. She didn't come from a perfectly healthy kid that one day killed his friends trying to help them out, nor from her sister abandoning her and a creepy guy grooming her. Any other show would have said one of those things was f***ed up enough for chaotic as hell Jinx to exist. Arcane says, nah. Actually, Jinx comes from a little kid growing up in this environment. Years of growing up in a world of constant need, crime and injustice created a kid unstable enough to become Jinx. And this environment is a result of what? The conflict between the Undercity and the Upper City, which also killed her parents, FYI. I mean, Powder went hungry half of her life. The kids look at the apartment of a struggling inventor in the Upper City, and to them, it's a palace. That's what started Jinx. So again, what's the ultimate reason why Jinx and Vi will fight each other? The inequality between the Undercity and the Upper City. The promise here is vague but strong and completely honest, and everything that comes after builds upon it. Not one interaction in one scene in any of the 9 episodes can be removed from the conflict between the Upper City and the Undercity, between Piltover and Sun. And every interaction in every scene in each one of the 9 episodes approaches the conflict from the same perspective the prologue does. an interpersonal one, but said conflict remains a shadow that goes way beyond any individual character and forces all of them to make mistakes. How's that for a fulfilled promise? By the end of episode 3, Arcane is clearly not only about Vi and Jinx, but a number of people that love each other or are going to love each other at some point. The tone of the story, going back again to the prologue, tells you eventually bad things are going to happen to all of those relationships. You would have thought Arcane would want to provide a cool, aesthetically jaw-dropping backstory to boost the IP of the game. Any other show would have done that. These people loved each other, eventually they betrayed each other, then they hate each other, cool. We have our champions and the reasons for their legendary rivalries. Let's play the game. Well, that's like antimatter for the writers of Arcane. You could almost think the people from Riot made the game to advertise the show. However you realize it, there is not a single shortcut, not one lazy decision in the whole season. To illustrate this, let me focus on this scene. We spent 8 episodes seeing Silco as the villain of the show. This cunning, ruthless, detached drug dealer that manipulates, threatens, tortures and kills anyone because the only thing he says he cares about is power. A guy with the unequivocal character design of a villain with an underwater lair in the vein of a Bond villain. Then we learn from his point of view that Vander, his friend, his brother, betrayed him. And since that moment, he cares about nothing and no one but power. After all of that, here Silco thinks he is in the same position Vander found himself when he betrayed him. Silco took care of Jinx, and for all his talk about forgetting the past, for all his actions, his philosophy, the only thing that matters is power, for all his hate of Vander for surrender the fight to play that with Vi and Powder, Silco now has the opportunity of achieving everything he ever wanted. The only thing he needs to do is surrender Jinx. But he can do it, because she's now his daughter. Because Silco loves Jinx. The show could have presented Silco and Jinx as people that need to display a villain facade, but in close quarters, they're a fun family. The show could have made them unapologetically villains that only take care of each other because they truly love each other. The show could have presented their relationship as something complicated but relatable in 1,000 ways. What the writers of Arcane did? They gave us skin-crawling scenes that show Silco and Jinx's relationship as conflictive, violent, petty, volatile, codependent, who knows what else. But Silco loves Jinx. Then Jinx kills Silco, and you see both love each other anyway. And the fact Jinx kills Silco to protect her sister Vi from him is the final act in Jinx killing forever the part of her that is still Vi's sister Powder. One might be tempted to think well-executed hard choices in writing make for awesome entertainment. But let's go back to this scene, because we have even more hard choices here. Silco thinks that what's happening is a cosmic joke, because he is in the same position Vander was and he can't do something different. But he isn't in the same position. Vander had lost the war. He could have kept fighting, but more likely than not, he would have lost, and the kids would have lost the only thing they had left, their lives and a certain freedom in keeping their heads low. Vander did what was a sensible choice after the girls lost their parents to the rebellion he led. Silco's position is almost the opposite. He had won, he only had to sacrifice one more life, and more likely than not, he would have had all the power he ever wanted, and the Undercity would have been better off for it. He would have succeeded where Vander had failed, but not even his hate for Vander, not even being able to spit out his statue as the powerful leader of a booming new zone. F*** you, brother, I was right and you were wrong. Not even that can surpass his love for Jinx. The cunning, amoral villain that threatens little children loses because he loves too much to do the smart thing. These guys made that choice. This is another kind of promise a writer makes. Your characters are going to behave in a way that feels natural, understandable at least. if they spend pages and pages portraying Silco, complex as it might be, in a specific way, how do they get Silco to make this complete 180 without it feeling out of character? How do you make your audience understand this change? After all, because you refused to make one single easy choice, you presented the reason he shifts his relationship with Jinx as anything but pure and wholesome. Well, obviously, you show to the audience no one is as good as they think, and many times their own self-perceived virtues are the reason of their worst mistakes, and conversely, no one is as bad as they think, and many times their own self-perceived vices are the reason of their better deeds. The best of intentions could make you do terrible things. The worst intentions could bring the ideal outcomes. These guys can't make an easy choice to save their lives. Silco only thought of himself, his power, the freedom of the Undercity as a way to achieve this power. His selfish approach won, and when something personal goes wrong, he betrays his whole philosophy and rejects his win for the well-being of a single person, his Jinx. He let Jinx be so important to him that betraying his life goal for her had become the selfish thing to do. His Jinx. Silco changes thus a little 180 and still remains who he is at his core, because he was always obsessed with loyalty in a selfish, immature way. This, of course, has an unnerving corollary that makes total sense. If Vander and Silco are opposites, that would mean that if Vander had had the victory in his hands and had to sacrifice the life of someone he loved, he would've. I'm not talking about protecting your found family when you are in the losing side with them. I'm talking about sacrificing one person with victory in reach. Vander was always about the greater good, so one person doesn't matter. His greater good approach lost, and he retreated doing the opposite, betraying his whole philosophy by taking care of two lives and forgiving the greater good. He convinced himself those handful of lives and keeping the Undercity in relative peace was the greater good now. Vander changed, did a little 180 and still remained who he was at his core. But in Silco's position, he would have surrendered Jinx. Think about it. Vander was for sure a stern but just and beloved revolution leader. He didn't, like Silco, torture people just to assert dominance, didn't threaten children, etc. But you can bet your ass he sent people to their deaths in strategic moves, Robb Stark style. And only after everything was lost, he couldn't do it anymore. But if he could have won the revolution, if someone would have offered a deal that only needed the sacrifice of someone he loved, he would have. Because he wasn't selfish. Silco couldn't take the win by betraying Jinx because he was selfish. Vander would have sacrificed her because he was selfless. The best of intentions could make you do terrible things. Not a damn easy decision to save their lives, I tell you. This is a show where people might fight each other, but in the end, when it counts, they always choose love over power and revenge. With that through line, you might think I'm describing My Little Pony. Arcane is not My Little Pony. Most of the trauma and tragedy in the show comes from the characters choosing love over hate. And not exactly because love is not enough to overcome the conflict between Piltover and Son. This would be a realistic notion, although more often than not is used by edgelords in a disingenuous way. Now, in this case, the web of hopes and dreams, incentives and power games in Piltover and Son wins itself with our characters' bonds, and the mixture is quite literally explosive. Let's count all the times they chose love over hate. Vander leaving the fight and taking the girls in. Vander choosing to save Vi instead of attacking Silco. Silco embracing Jinx instead of killing her. Echo not killing Jinx. Mal's mom exiling her to protect her. Jace not attacking Vi. Silco lamenting he can't surrender Jinx. Jinx saving Vi from Silco. And despite the bad consequences, these bonds, this love, it's still presented as a worthy goal. The opposite of the patronizing "love will solve everything in the end" philosophy is the edgelord "you are so lame believing in love" philosophy. Arcane spats on both. Both are equally childish, and although they are understandable in kids, Arcane's edgelord Maximus not only fails at his philosophy in the end, but we see how infantile his edgelordness is. Because for all his menacing "I'm the real deal" persona, for all his hatred of Vander, his ambition for power, his whole stick is exactly the same as Little Powder's tantrum against Vi. The same as her need to help out even if she knows she can't. Silco is a scared little kid that grew up intellectually, but not emotionally. Just like most villains that pretend to be superior because they don't have the burden of love. Is just an overgrown child with a tantrum.
We'll show them. We will show them all. Everyone betrays us, Jinx.
This scene is considered one of the most impactful ones in the show, but if you think about it, it shouldn't. We didn't see Echo and Jinx play before. We barely saw them interact. There is no emotional connection. Or is there? Does all the strength of the scene come from the ridiculously awesome score and animation? I don't know if the absence of previous scenes between the two kids was because of production time constraints, or if it was the plan all along. In any case, it was yet another not easy narrative choice, because there is no concrete setup for this payoff. The emotional strength of the scene relies precisely on the fact that we didn't see them together. We want to have seen it. We want it to be real. We suffer vicariously through Vi and the kids who Jinx killed, and the Watch. What do you do if you don't want to rely in a previous setup so your payoff, well, pays off? You put the setup in the payoff, of course. One of those easy writing choices they teach you in Creative Writing 101. This small detail appeared once before, but Jinx and Echo were already older. The Watch timed that first very real fight between them we saw. Here it makes us believe they timed their old games, and that completes the connection enough. Also, they build the flashbacky nature of their scene with ridiculously awesome score and animation. Man, a year is going to be totally worth it.